after this next talk. Okay. So our next guests and speakers are going to be Dr. Allison Haye, a newly licensed veterinarian, Jessie Wilson, an oldly licensed registered animal health technician, and Rebecca Palmer, a veterinary student at the University of Glasgow. I think we still need to get them set up for their talks here, so give us a few minutes. And it's going to be a talk about pathways to a career in animal health. Laura, I think we'll need you to give over the hosting rights.
Sorry, Susan?
We need you to give over the hosting permissions, and I think probably to Allison to start.
Yep.
Are people able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation to share. Is my picture up there, or am I just like a letter?
We can give you host privileges, and then you can put your picture up. Can you?
Oh, it's okay. I was just curious if I have to look at my webcam or not. It's all good. Okay, I guess I can get started. My name is Dr. Allison.
You can put your video on so we can see you.
Okay, yeah, I can
comfortable with that.
Try and figure that out.
Yeah, you're a host now, Allison, so you can share your screen and and put your presentation up.
Yeah, I don't have much of a presentation. It's just me chatting. There we go. I'm up here now. Okay, awesome. So I'm Dr. Allison Haye, and I graduated this spring from the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, and I am currently working in a small animal practice here in Saskatoon. I only work with cats and dogs. And like I said, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I just have kind of my story to share. So today I was asked to kind of speak to middle school and high school age students. And I asked myself what it is I would have wanted to hear from a speaker when I was in middle school or high school. And I'm somebody who always knew that I wanted to be a vet. So I wanted to speak to those students who are also considering becoming a veterinarian or a doctor, really anything with post-secondary in their future. So when I really thought about what it was that I would have wanted to hear, I realized that I didn't want to hear about how cool being a vet was. I was pretty convinced that it was already the best job in the world. What I really wanted to know was how they did it, what steps they took to get into vet school. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of my story throughout that, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, just kind of speaking honestly of how I found that experience. So first off, what exactly do you need to become a veterinarian? Well, first you have to graduate high school, and then you have to spend at least 2 years at a university in an undergraduate program. It doesn't really matter what program. There's a bunch of required courses that you have to take, and once you've completed those, you can start to apply to vet schools. And which vet schools you can apply to kind of vary on where you live. So for me, I am from Calgary originally, and I was allowed to apply to the vet school in Calgary and here in Saskatoon. So once you apply for vet school, you wait to hear back if you were selected for an interview. And if you're fortunate enough to have an interview, you wait to hear back from that if you were chosen to join the class. And then from there, it's another 4 years of veterinary medicine before you can become a vet. So it sounds fairly simple on paper, but what did that process actually look like for me? Well, even before I graduated high school, I was volunteering in a small animal clinic. I started when I was about 15 years old, and I loved it so much I did it right up to university. And I promised I'd be honest with you, my high school grades were not the greatest. I did okay, but I was not top of the class at all. In fact, my grades were just barely enough to squeak me into a biology major program at the University of Calgary. Fortunately, once you're in university, your high school grades don't really matter anymore. But even in my first year of university, I again didn't do the greatest. I had average grades. I was far, far from top of the class. But after I had 1 year under my belt, I kind of started to get the hang of it, slowly figuring out which ways of studying worked best for me. So I actually didn't apply to vet school until my third year of university. I technically had completed those courses I was talking about after 2 years, but I was so scared of getting rejected from vet school that I just didn't even apply. And looking back, I really wish that I had applied because, like most things in life, the worst thing that could have happened was they say no. And in the grand scheme of things, that's really not such a big deal. But I applied after my third year of university to both schools, Calgary and Saskatoon, and they both rejected me. I didn't even get an interview to either one, and mostly because my grades were too low. And it was really hard to hear that, but it kind of gave me the kick in the pants I needed to really buckle down and study even harder. So another year went by, and I applied again after my fourth year of university. And this time I got interviews to both schools. But I was rejected from both again. Again, mostly because of those first year marks we were talking about. So at this point, I hit kind of the big obstacle of my story, which is that after 4 years, I had technically completed all of my requirements for a degree in biology. And even though my grades had been improving over the 4 years, those not so great grades from first year were really dragging down my grades from my later years. So I had a choice. I could graduate and keep applying to vet school with the grades that I had, hoping I would eventually make the cut, or I could retake another full year of university courses to replace those first year marks. And this was a really tough decision for me because even if I spent another year retaking courses, it certainly didn't guarantee me a spot in vet school. It is incredibly competitive to get into vet schools. And again, being honest with you, I don't get good grades easily. I'm not the best at memorizing little details. I'm not the best multiple choice test taker. So I worked and studied incredibly hard to get the grades that I was getting. It was probably the most stressful time in my life, is working as hard as I was to get those grades. So the thought of doing a whole nother year with that level of stress and pressure was really daunting. But in the end, I figured it was 1 more year and I would always spend the rest of my life kind of wondering what if I didn't at least try. So I got through my 5th year of university, and it was a long and stressful year. But in the end, I applied to both schools and I got interviews to both again. And I actually heard back from Calgary first, and they still had rejected me. So that was pretty crushing. But later that week, I heard back from Saskatoon, the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, and got a phone call welcoming me to the class of 2020. And I was so excited. You know, I remember crying on the phone with our academic dean when I found out, you know, my lifelong dream was going to come true. So I found that to be the most difficult part, was actually getting into vet school. Once I was in, I will say it was way, way more information than I could have possibly imagined to learn. But to be honest, I found it much less stressful. For one, I was learning material that I truly cared about for the most part. And for two, I no longer had to worry about getting those really high grades. I could do average and frankly below average in the class. And at the end of those 4 years, I was still graduating with a doctorate of veterinary medicine. So overall, I had a wonderful time in vet school. And so that was by far like the least stressful part of that process. And it wouldn't be a talk from a veterinarian if at some point I didn't talk about how much I love my job and how awesome I think my profession is. So I personally work in a small animal clinic with cats and dogs, and I love it because every day is a new challenge. There's no 2 days that are exactly alike. I'm forever and constantly learning new things. I'm getting to work with people and educate clients. And I guess most of all, what originally gets most of us interested in vet medicine, I get to help animals. So I love what I do, but even if perhaps working in a clinic, it doesn't speak to you, veterinary medicine has a huge scope to it. I spent most of my summers throughout vet school kind of exploring different options in veterinary medicine. And so I ended up working with sport horses. I worked in research on a parasite here in Canada. I worked for the Public Health Agency of Canada, all alongside veterinarians. So that's another kind of great bonus to being a vet, is that you're not limited to one area or another. So overall, I guess the takeaway points that I was hoping to come away from my story would be, if you're interested in becoming a veterinarian or anything like that, I know that you can do it. I was somebody who didn't necessarily have the greatest grades, and that is something that you can overcome. I highly recommend volunteering in a vet clinic if that's what you're interested in. I know throughout our discussions today that may not be the easiest for everyone, but if you're able to do it, I highly recommend it, as it gets you a really clear picture of what being a veterinarian is kind of like. And as cheesy as this is going to sound, really in life, find what you're passionate about. Find something that drives you. Strive for something that you are willing to take that 5th extra scary year of university for. And even when you're told no, keep trying. Do not give up on your dreams. It has been totally worth the 9 years of university it took for me to get to this point. I really do love my job. So thank you guys for your attention and time. Happy to take questions at the end, but I know that we're on kind of a tight schedule, so I guess I will try and jump it to the next person here. I think that I have to do.
Hi everybody, my name is Jessie Wilson, and I am a veterinary technician, or a registered veterinary technician from Yellowknife Northwest Territories on Chief Dry Geese Territory. I am going to focus this presentation on online learning, because that is basically all I've been doing for many, many years, and also it seems very apt as we are on the time of virtual education, it seems, so we're on that path as a society. So yeah, like I said, I've been doing online courses since 2012, when I started my animal welfare certificate. I had just come out of high school and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Going to a university seemed like a big step for not knowing the path that I wanted to take, and I did know I wanted to work with animals, so I took a animal welfare certificate, which was only a couple months, but I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun doing it, and so that evolved into me taking my vet tech diploma through Thompson Rivers University, and it's a program where you're required to work at a vet clinic as well as go to school at a vet, or as well taking your program. So it was 3 years of working at a vet clinic and 3 years of going to school at the same time, which was very hard. It was a lot, but worth it. And the program is set up so well that you're supported all the time. And I guess I'm here to talk about that program in particular and what it brought for me in my life, because I had so many wonderful opportunities because of online schooling. We go through the PowerPoint here. This is just a couple of photos of the Arctic, and through this online learning, I've done many spay-neuter clinics in northern remote communities, because being home and being with my family during these courses, I got to meet many experts in the field who I don't know if I would have met in school. Yeah, just being immersed in the community in Yellowknife and going to school and working, I met very cool people in. got to do lots of spay neuter clinics, and like here's a picture of me by the Arctic Ocean and all the huskies, and getting to see like, yeah, different cultures and different dogs in their cultures. And that's been really amazing, and I'm very fortunate. So just like a couple of benefits of online learning that I wanted to share is you're not just surrounded by classmates, which is nice if you're all learning to have people to bounce ideas off of. I understand it is important to have a community while learning. But what I have learned through distance education is you can build your own classmates, you can build your own community. Like I said, I've met a diversity of people in the veterinary field from all experience levels, but also I got to see how veterinary infiltrates through many different fields. It's not just veterinary medicine. So that was kind of neat. I got to stay in Yellowknife with my community, and I got to stay with my family and friends, which is important too. Also, you get to work and gain some income while going to school, so like it wasn't so rough when school ended because I had been making money. And then you get to set your own hours, which is really empowering, and you feel like you have a lot of control, and you do have a lot of control in your life. And as much as you get to stay in your community and work, you also can travel freely because you're in charge of your schedule. If something happens that you need to leave town for a bit, your school comes with you, and I think that's neat. That being said, like these are all benefits, but it is hard. It's a steep learning curve for sure, but most like you can do it. Like you learn how you study, you learn how you work best, and you just set yourself up for success, and you'll figure it out. You just have to stick with it. The first few months of online learning I found so difficult, but I mean, I've been doing it since 2012. I did that whole diploma, and yeah, you just figure out your own rhythm. A rhythm develops for sure. And I've heard from a few people that like maybe online schooling closes doors for you, but like honestly, only doors have opened for me by doing online programming through the spay neuter clinics in the north, through career opportunities I've had down in southern Canada, but also last year I applied for a managerial position in the Galapagos Islands, which is around like 1,000 kilometers or 900 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. And not a lot of people know that there's a population there, like a human population, but there's around 25,000 people, 4 populated islands, and they have dogs and cats too. So they had a vet clinic who were focusing on spaying and neutering, which is all I've really focused on in the northern communities. So my northern experience through school and working was transferable to this spay neuter clinic in the Galapagos, and it was 6 months. I got to run a veterinary clinic with this smiling guy in the photo there, who's a vet from Britain named Ben. So I mean, no, online schooling, if anything, it just like shows you how many different avenues there are to take, how many doors there are to open. This is just a couple pups. One is from one of the Arctic spay neuter clinics, and then the other one is from the Galapagos when we were just walking on the island and saw a bunch of baby sea lions. And I guess these are just a couple tips. Be patient with yourself. It's easy to beat yourself up when you're overwhelmed and stressed, but you'll get through it. I think this second tip here is one of the most important for online learning, is try to find members in your community who are working in the field that you're learning. So whether you're taking a geology course or a vet course, like reach out in your community and see who the experts are and ask them questions, ask if you can shadow them. And that's what I did a lot with many different courses. And I got to meet really cool people and had many, again, I feel like I've said this a million times, but very cool opportunities through just trying to find community members who could help me. And they become your classmates. Don't do your schoolwork in bed. It's really easy to sit there when you're tired and do it, but like sit up straight and do it, because yeah, you have to just kick your own butt. And then pick a career that you're excited about. I think doing all this online schoolwork would have been impossible if I didn't care about the career that I was going into. So like take your time choosing what you want to do with your life. It took me a few years after high school. and yeah, pick something that makes you excited, and then it makes the learning easier. And take breaks. Take breaks. When you're doing online schooling, it just feels like you're trying to balance life and school and, you know, all the little things, and you don't feel you can take a break, and you just have to keep going, and like that's the worst thing you can do. If you feel overwhelmed and stressed, I recommend taking at least a day. Just like completely stop doing it, and you'll thank yourself for it in the end. Yeah, and I think that's it. It was just a little pep talk on online learning, because again, like I said, it seems like a lot of people are being forced to do online schooling now, but also if you want to go to school but you don't want to leave your community, online schooling is a good option for you. Thank you, and good luck.
So maybe we'll move on then to Rebecca. And Rebecca, you do have all hosting capabilities. So
Yep. Hi, I think we're good. Just figure out how to share my screen here, get my presentation going. There we go. Maybe I can make that. All right, that's gonna have to work. Sorry, one sec. All right, there we go. Can we all see?
yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I'm a fourth year veterinary medicine student at the University of Glasgow. So I'm currently talking to you all the way over in Scotland. And I'm just going to tell you a bit about my journey so far in the veterinary medicine world and some of my involvement in One Health practices along the way. So taking it back to the very beginning, I grew up in Northern Ontario with two small animal veterinarians for parents. Our house is attached to their practice, so I literally grew up in a vet clinic. I spent a lot of time around animals from a very early age, between my dad growing up on a dairy farm and my parents' clinic. So if you're looking at my PowerPoint, the dog on the photo on the right, she got used to pulling me around quite regularly in a sled, and I think in return I threw her like multiple birthday parties a year, so it was a good deal. You could see how a career in vet med would make sense for someone that was in my shoes, although to be honest, I wasn't actually convinced that it was the career for me until a little bit later. So I had always liked the idea of vet med, but when it came time to look into university, I wasn't sold it was what I wanted to do. I think it was a mix of me being a stubborn 18-year-old and not wanting to follow my parents' exact footsteps, and also just me only having really been exposed to a very small part of the field. I really wanted to keep my options open, so when it came time to go to an undergrad degree, I went to the University of Guelph. And at Guelph, I pursued a joint degree in biology and international development, and in that program, I really loved it. I had to take all my maths and science. I still got all of my science prereqs, but I also really got to discover how much I loved the interface of human, animal, and environmental health. So after my third year at Guelph, I got a summer job as a research assistant at the Ontario Veterinary College, or OVC. And at this job, I was introduced to a professor in population medicine, and she was working on One Health focused research in Northern Canada, specifically Iqaluit and Rigolet. So in my fourth year, she was awesome, and I had the opportunity to do a fourth year research project with her. And yeah, that's kind of where we go from here. So knowing that vet care in Northern Canada, access is very limited, and understanding the intricate links between human health, animal health, and the environment, my project was to track domestic animal populations in Iqaluit and Rigolet, and to find out which types of domestic animals were most common in these communities and roughly how many there were. So Canada's north is obviously quite big, And my goal of this project was ultimately hoping that someday it could work as a guide for the allocation of veterinary services to maximize veterinary impact. So it's just this project alone is not likely the most effective way of doing that, is just two communities, and they're not necessarily the best representation of Canada's North. But someday I think I would really like to do this again and reach out to more communities who are keen on receiving services and try to go from there and expand it. But back on track, seeing this new side of the veterinary world really confirmed for me that I wanted to apply to vet school. I thought this was just the coolest project ever. And like Allison was saying, it's notoriously hard to get into vet school in Ontario or anywhere. And it often takes people a few tries to get in. I knew that I wanted to go, so I just applied everywhere in my first round of applications. And I didn't get into Ontario, which was admittedly a bit of a hard pill to swallow. But that following September, I found myself moving to Scotland, and I kind of remember like sitting back thinking, what am I doing? This is crazy. But looking back, it was the best choice I could have made. So I ended up at the University of Glasgow. I have been here I'm going into my 4th year now. We are mostly online, but that's okay. And yeah, it's been great. I've been in beautiful Scotland. So moving on from Scotland, I realized sheep are probably a little bit of a curveball on this scope of this conference, but there's a point here. So for anyone who's not familiar, vet school is typically made up of a few years of lectures and labs combined, and then you have your final year is mostly clinical rotations. Vet schools in the UK also have an additional requirement called extramural studies, and these EMS programs, what we call them, they have 26 weeks of clinical work that you have to do in addition to your rotations in your final year. So basically they are just an excuse to get you out and working in clinics and working on farms before you graduate and before your final year, so that you're really maximizing that animal contact time. So it's brought me so many really cool opportunities. For example, in my first year, I went and lived on a farm in this picture on the coast of Northern Ireland for 2 weeks in a small little town called Ballycastle. And I was working for the farmer during their lambing season. So basically I was a midwife for the 150 sheep in this photo, and it was just the coolest thing ever. So back to these extra weeks we had to fill and trying to plan those out for my clinical placements, I was in my 2nd year and I found myself really still having an interest in animal healthcare in Northern Canada, wanting to get involved in some capacity. I was able to use these weeks as an excuse to seek out that opportunity, and after harassing quite a few people about where I could go, I ended up getting in touch with Dr. Michelle Tuma, who is a veterinarian in Yellowknife and running the next session, and she's awesome, so I'm sure it's going to be great. And that brings me to my next slide. So in July of 2019, I was able to join Dr. Tuma for a remote clinic in Fort Resolution. This clinic was primarily for spays, neuters, and vaccines. And it was easily my favorite placement. Had it not been for COVID this summer, I probably would have tried to go back. I definitely would have tried to go back. But that'll be for the future at some point. So from then till now, on Monday, I just started my 4th year of veterinary school. It's going to be kind of a weird year. We're mostly online, but just gotta do what we gotta do. It's a 5-year program. So starting next May, I will be going into 12 months of rotations. During these rotations, I would really love to go back to Northern Canada if possible. So I'm going to make sure that I can get on that if it's a possibility for me. Once I graduate, I'm not entirely sure where I will be, but I still expect that at that point I'll be wanting to go up north in some capacity. So for anyone that's younger or wanting to go into vet med at all, or considering a path of this type even at all, my path is not necessarily traditional or even linear for that matter, and I love it. It has given me so many cool opportunities. So just like the other girls were saying, you don't really need to do the traditional go to undergrad, go right away, go out into vet school right away. There are other ways to do this kind of job and other kind of ways to do this kind of work. You also don't even need to do this path through veterinary medicine. I think you could do through being a technician, through being a biologist, even through public health. There are lots of really cool options to work in this field. Just taking your science courses and your math courses and getting involved and learning more about anything that interests you, I think is a really good place to start. So I think that we're going to try to save some time for questions. So I'll wrap up here, but thank you to everyone for listening, and to Vets Without Borders for having me.
Thank you, Rebecca. There's some interesting discussions on the chat line about the Scotch there, but I'm sure we have additional questions. There is, I think we'll do questions for all three or all two panelists right now. And we've got one in the chat line from Danny about what did your vet school look like in terms of racial diversity? And that's a question for Allison, but also may apply to you too, Rebecca. Were there Black, Indigenous, and people of color in your courses?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. My class, I would say, I think because I am overseas in Scotland, we don't have very many Indigenous people in my class. I don't know if there aren't any in my class. I'm not sure if there are any at my school. I think it's maybe more diverse in some of the North American schools, but my school is also quite international. So about half of my class is not from the UK. So they come from Canada, the US, South America. A lot are from Asia as well. So it's quite a big group of people. It's really interesting.
I guess I can speak more to kind of my school that I went to. So in Saskatoon, the school is split up into what province you're from, like how many students are able to come into that. And there are 2 spots that are reserved for Indigenous students. Although I was on like an Indigenous student circle committee throughout my degree, and there were a number of us who had self-identified as Indigenous, but certainly not a large majority of the class. I'd say there was maybe 6 out of our 75 classmates who self-identified as Indigenous. And people of color, unfortunately, I'd have to say that there were not really any people of color. It's pretty white in that respect.
It's a great question. I know that various vet schools across the country do have some seats available for Indigenous students. Maybe we should do a quick cross-country checkup on that. Marty, if you're still there, or somebody from ABC, do you want to? Oh, here we go in the chat line. So Jordan, WCVM, one of the least diverse professions. Yeah, one of the least diverse professions out there. Claire,
I believe,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I believe that at WCVM we have 2 students for like spots for Indigenous students, and then there's only 1 spot for a student from either Yukon, Northwest Territories, or Nunavut.
Yeah, ABC doesn't have any reserved for Indigenous. Guelph. Any comments from Guelph? Tessa, I'm going to ask you to talk about the perspective from Calgary. Great. So lots of discussions around that. And I know in Calgary, our grad students have written an open letter to the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine asking further about both BIPOC and Indigenous representation in the faculty, across the staff, things like that. So there's a real move to question this and see what the status is and what needs to be changed. And yeah, thanks for that, Heather. The diversity committees and lack of diversity is recognized within the veterinary medical AVMA. So a seat will be reserved in at University of Montreal in the future. And Jordan, that we need to add anti-racism into our diversity inclusion agenda in veterinary schools. In the US, most of the Indigenous graduates attended Washington State or Colorado State. And I'm just going back to Scott Bender's comment earlier. There's a Native American Veterinary Association. Can't speak for other First Nations, but I know 14 Navajo veterinarians and a couple from other tribes, mostly women. So, yeah, economic inequality. Great discussion points here, very thought-provoking question. Maybe there's room for another summit or short workshop on this, and where Vets Without Borders can play a role. And Heather Fenton, a wealth of resources here, thank you. Okay. Just looking at time, do we have any other questions for either Allison or Rebecca about their career paths? Anything that people would like to know? Any further resources? I think we can and that's a great question from Katie Powell here. As Director of Logistics and Volunteers, what's the best way to recruit vets, especially new graduates who may be apprehensive about traveling up north in these remote areas? I think that may be in part answered through Michelle's or addressed in Michelle Tuma's talk next. I think it's a great question that I could go on about, but I won't. Great, Michelle will cover that. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, and feel free to keep commenting, but I think maybe what we will do is move on to Linda